You're listening to The Adventuring Party, talking about gaming the Irish way.
Welcome to the party. I'm Graham.
I'm Owen.
And I'm Shane.
And this morning, /afternoon/evening, I don't know when you listen to this podcast, we have brought you together to talk about the very interesting topic of party selection for ongoing games or campaigns. So, back when we were all little gamers, we may only have known 5 people. I mean, maybe just 5 people and that was it, but we probably only knew about 5 gamers. So, putting together your party for your long-term campaign wasn't difficult. You grabbed every gamer you could find and you stuffed them into a sitting room somewhere, and or a kitchen, or a tent in the back garden, or a magical, mystical wonderland. I don't know your life. And regardless of who you got, those were your peeps, and you played your games with them. But these days, that's not really how life works at all. And we've got a much larger social group, even if a lot of it's online at the moment. And people who get on really well with you may not necessarily get on really well with each other. And people who get on really well with each other may not necessarily get on really well with each other if they're playing elves or dwarves or samurai space cowboys. So the question becomes, what should you think about before getting 4 or 5 people to agree to spend several months as mystical, magical space cowboys?
This is one I see come up a bit partly because of, it's definitely when I started gaming, I was very much in that I know 5 people there in all my games mode. But I've also had this sort of thing, well, I need to meet people. I need to, I've heard there's something called social obligations. It tells you need to be a friendly person who knows everyone. And I've sort of been, cajoling people into my game. Especially when I was in Galway and I was basically helping to run one of the local game societies and try to get RPGs going there. I sort of had to be very open. In fact, I was running open games quite often of just having people come in on the street.
And that's an interesting one, actually, because as I get older, certainly, I tend to use some of my games as a way of, staying in touch with people I don't see that often, or as a way of sort of, as an extension of sociality. But that's part of where you run into this problem.
Yeah, my current game is very much designed to both do work with my regulars, but also it is to meet people I haven't seen in years who have had a game with in years and just get them back in the fold, but also to meet new people that I've been recommended by other friends who need a game in these dark times, and it's just I had to make a little space for them. And it's working out so well enough so far because, they're nice people, who get along with regular humans and such. But it is a tricky balancing act because, there's only so many people you can run for. I
don't think it's even that. It's also that, when you say they're nice people to get on with regular humans, you can have 2 people who are perfectly lovely people who just have very different gaming styles, or even just very different personality styles. Or you can have a toxic dynamic that springs up, either because people have actually known each other for too long and have gotten into some weird habits, or just that, the communication isn't there, or they just come from very different places. I think maybe if you have a social game, you run the risk of trying to be all things to all people. And that, if you're we'll get everyone in and we'll have a little bit for everybody and it'll be a social thing, but it's also a game thing. Are you in danger then of kind of diluting your brand a little bit on that? Does that make sense?
I think, first of all, your priorities and capabilities for including people in games is going to depend a lot on what stage of their life people are in. And you're generally best off having people at a similar stage of their life all playing together.
Interesting.
Because if you get, for example, 3 people who have, let's say, young or newborn kids who are playing in a game, and you put them in with 3 university students, you're not going to get great lining up of schedules.
Yeah.
Because some of the people are going to be like, I've got 3 hours on a Thursday. That's it. It starts at 7. it finishes at 10. That is the window that I have between making sure my kids are mostly asleep and having to fall into bed unconscious. That's my 3-hour window for me to claw a little bit of something for myself.
See,
That's important to me. And then 3 more people going, sure, we'll play wherever. Like, we're college students. What have we got to do? Very different priorities.
Yeah, I think over the years, people have realized that telling me 10 minutes before the game that actually you won't be able to make it this week, is that cool? Is not cool. And is actually a wonderful way to get murdered by me. I'm not actually...
No, Graham. No. Here's what happens. They say that. Mm-hmm. You get very upset. Hang up the phone and go, right. And then the people who are actually there, have to deal with annoyed Graham. It's actually way worse than that.
Yeah,
Some person primes the landmine and then puts my foot on it and goes, all right, deal with that now. Whoop, whoop, whoop.
That's actually how it works when I'm teaching as well, funnily enough. And you may not necessarily believe this, but that's me doing my best not to be annoyed. That's me actually going, I'm not mad at you, but I am mad. But no, there's a very fair point there, because having expectations, I guess, in an ideal world, we'd all have the same expectations around about time and responsibilities and scheduling and things like that, but we don't. And you're right. It doesn't necessarily mean that one person is right and one person is wrong, but you've a different availability there. That's a very good point, actually.
Like it's just that when you do that, you have to go, okay, these are people in the same kind of understanding of what's going on. Like if you sat down a college student and said, this is the situation these people live in, they may not understand. Like, it's not that they won't comprehend it, but they won't understand it. Because sub 25, your brain is not finished growing. You're still developing certain things. There's still a healthy core of narcissism there that's very important to keeping you, on track and doing stuff, but the world resolves a little bit around yourself, which is fine. I
don't think that's entirely fair. I think some of us who have worked really hard at not developing our personalities at all have hung on to that healthy core of narcissism until we're, for example, 40, just to pick myself as a random example, But no, that's a fair point. Again, you're looking at trends here.
Yeah. So you just got to go, it's difficult to explain to someone who's like 20 how busy someone at 40 can be. It's just difficult. And you can get into it, you can go, okay, well, we'll try and explain this. But it would be a bit like going, I'm going to game with my kids. And I had my kids when I was 20. And now I'm 40 and I'm going to game my kids who are 20. You might get on gangbusters. It might be great. Or there might be a little bit of generational gap there and having a thing to explain to people, It depends on the person. But when you're setting up your group, you probably want a certain amount of commonality to start with.
Yeah, I think that... Sorry, I have a hair in my mouth. I think that might vary depending on the individual. But I think, okay, so first thing to think about is, do these people's schedules and their expectations in terms of investment versus reward, do they line up? That's a good thing to think about, first of all. That's a good point, though. And not something I necessarily would have thought of. The thing that I find is, right, just to give you an idea, this is what made me think of it. Obviously, we're in the middle of a global pandemic at the moment. If you're listening to this in a couple of years' time, when this is under more control, there was a global pandemic. The shot we get every 6 months now at this stage, and if you miss it, you're not allowed to leave the house. Well, before we got to that point, there was a global pandemic, but because of that, my schedule's all over the place. But I use my gaming as a little bit of sort of outreach so that I can see people that I haven't seen in a while. And one of the things I realized was, I'm like, here's this person. I've known them for 30 years. They're one of my best friends. They're great. Here's this person. I've known them over the course of the last 5 or 10 years. They're wonderful, very interesting. These people are interesting. They're funny. They're great. I'll get them together and then I'll get to see them once a week. And you're like, oh, wow, they do not like each other at all. I would not have seen that coming. But it does happen, And I wonder, if you have a social group that already exists, and you're sort of going, look, let's play a game together, at least you have an idea of how the dynamic is going to work. But if you don't, I think maybe you can't sit someone down and go, will you sign up to these behavioral things? You can't sit down and say to someone, how let's do a survey. How do you get on with people? I think the only way that actually comes out is in playing it. So I wonder if, before you embark on any sort of long to medium term gaming enterprise with a group, do a couple of shorter ones maybe first. You sort of go, okay, I have a pre-published adventure. There's something like the Mines of Phandelver. This will take 6. Mines of Phandelver is a bit long actually, but something that'll take maybe 6 to 8 sessions. And at the end of it, you go, oh man, these people hate each other. No, I'm not running a long-term campaign with them. I think maybe, or even not hate each other, but I don't like GMing for them, or I feel that I'm not getting out of this experience what I want, you know? I wonder if every long-term campaign should come with a little bit of a tester at the beginning. What do you think?
One of the things I'd say is long-term campaigns are less common than we believe them to be. That's one of the things.
Right.
I'm unusual, apparently, in the amount of long-term campaigns I run. I start telling people stuff like, yeah, okay, we're at 10,000 experience in Warhammer. And they're like, what? And I'm like, we're 10,000. How are you that high? I'm like, we've been playing for 70 weeks. You get about 100 XP a week. We're like, why is this crazy? Plus awards?
Yeah.
Like, that's not... They're like, but that's very long. And I'm like, what are you people doing? What is like? Can't you sustain anything? Can't you commit to something like here's the start, here's the middle? Here, you don't do that. You don't. And it's like apparently we're like a 7. I've had multiple. I've had a 7-year Star Wars campaign. I've had a 5-year Star Wars campaign. and I've gone to the ends of systems. So Owen often gets a bit bolshy about systems, going, yeah, that breaks down to 400 XP, and it tell you what, adding 800 more XP after that did not resolve that problem. Because I see the ends of systems that most people don't get to. I don't know what other people do. I think they're playing for 6 weeks and the group breaks up. Or there's a fatal fall off in attendance or something.
I don't know. I think maybe their fatal non-neurotypical flaw might be the opposite of our fatal non-neurotypical flaw. I don't know.
Yeah. Just a general failure of persistence, which is generally annoying. By the way, just for people who are listening in a few years, if you're listening in a few years' time to this, the global pandemic, in fact, actually did happen. And some of us spent a very long time being very annoyed at the lily-livered nature of most people who couldn't handle staying inside for 2 years. They're just weak-willed softies who couldn't hack it.
Do you remember earlier on when Owen was talking about the people who would ring and then prime me and then I'd go off on my own.
Yeah.
In a similar fashion, we've had a while of the world priming Owen. So please excuse him while he goes off at all of us for a little bit. He needs this.
Yeah.
It's been a tough.
That's all good.
X number of months. I forget.
But no, it's. But if you're getting together a group, you don't necessarily know how long the group's going to last. You can plan for years, but it might just fatally fall apart. Like I've had games fall apart because people needed to move away. I've had games kind of shutter because people weren't enjoying the system, and I've had games shutter because there was a dysfunction in the player group, and it was. So what I do now is the way I work. I've kind of built a nexus of people who are willing to play with me and are kind of happy playing with me. And what I do now is I have that group, and if we feel we need to recruit, I go to the group with the name and I say, this is the person I'm considering. Do you know them? And if they know them, we can have a discussion immediately. If we don't know them, there's a bit of what are they like? And that's when you're doing that. It's a danger as a GM of you trying to construct the thing on your own, because you will have a perception of all these people that is not accurate to other people's perception of each other. There are people, I would never invite anyone into a game anymore. Yeah. I would go to the group and say, this is the person we're considering. I'm not mad about the idea of auditions, but we've sort of done auditions for stuff. And it's like, then it's not you, it's us.
It's not even perception, it's also dynamic, okay? So people will have different dynamics because that's how people interact with one another. One of the things that I have found is that if there is a particular issue with a player who's not enjoying themselves or there's friction or that sort of thing, I find the campaigns that I run have a tendency to outlast individual player issues. But they're always difficult to resolve. And I guess it's the pound of prevention. The ounce of prevention is worth the pound of cure. I don't know non-metric weights. So the smaller one, of prevention is worth the larger one of cure. If you can head it off at the pass, especially if you are some sort of robotic samurai cowboy, that's perhaps easier. If you can preempt it rather than having to deal with it, then I think that's better, if you know what I mean. I think previously when I was putting together, because I run long-term campaigns. I don't tend to run short stuff. I tend to get an idea and I run with it, and it become, if not to the end of the system, then pretty close to it. Because I think it's more rewarding to have player characters who then get to do an awful lot and become deeper and richer, and that's how I enjoy playing. So I presume it's how other people enjoy playing too. Anyway, there was a point to this story. Yeah, so I used to say if we were looking for a new person, let's say Owen's been playing with us for the last 3 years and Owen needs to move to England to teach, right? And we now need, which we did, and we now need to make up numbers, which we did. This is how I ended up with 8 people in the damn game. People kept leaving and I'd replace them and then they'd come back and then I couldn't say no and it was too many people and it made me sad. But look, it resolved itself eventually after the Jedi Rabbit disappeared. And literally just disappeared. The player just moved to Norway and I was like, where is he? And Owen was like, oh, he moved to Norway. And I was like, oh, okay. Anyway, not the point. The point is, when replacing people or getting new people in, I used to go to the group and I'd say, look, what about this person? Does anyone have anything bad to say about this person? And people would go, yes. And I'd go, okay, well, maybe not then. Or they'd say no. And I'd say, brilliant, let's bring them in and give them a try. The problem is, it's harder to get rid of people once they're coming in. So now, I have now changed that slightly. And this sounds terrible, but I don't care. This is based on empirical experience. I will now say, can someone tell me something good about this person? It is not enough that there's nothing bad known about them. I want to know, how are they going to increase and enhance our enjoyment of our game? How do I know you already get on with them? How do I know you've encountered them in the wild and they don't eat faces? That kind of thing. You know?
Yeah.
It's even stuff like sense of humor.
That's a good one.
You need to make sure that people have a similar sense of humor.
So,
I'm not talking about even edgy stuff here. I'm talking about just enjoys puns. Like, some people really dig puns. Let's say the GM and 2 players really dig puns, and then one of the players hates puns. Hates them. And it's non-stop. It's like, I cannot.
On that note, I live very close to the hotel that's currently being used for hotel quarantine for COVID. And every time I pass it, I sing Death Hotel, Death Hotel to the same tune as Particle Man from They Might Be Giants, right? Would you believe some people might find that annoying? So sense of humor, yes, is important.
It's general kind of compatibility of there needs to be at least a certain amount of compatibility in personality, which will include humor. There needs to be a certain amount of compatibility in play style. There needs to be a certain amount of compatibility in willing to share table time or share spotlight time. Because you can have the large ham and the large ham demands monologues and kind of one-on-one sessions with the GM, or like soliloquies with the GM, and you're kind of like, we're gonna just listen to this for hours.
You made a really important point, though, aside from the giant ham, which is playstyle. So let's say we're going to go off and we're going to play D&D, and we get 5 people, and people are like, yeah, okay, I know what D&D is. But each 5 of the 5 people might have very different ideas to what kind of D&D they end up playing. And then that will also be shaped by what the players want and what the GM wants. So you can end up going, well, okay, we all like, we're down the pub, we've met each other socially, we've done this, that, and the other together. We've a great time. But we don't enjoy the same type of role-playing game. And suddenly that was something that I was saying at the beginning, where people might get on socially great, but actually, in a gaming scenario, might want very different things from it. Thank you, Owen. I'd forgotten I said that.
Yep. Yeah. Because if you got...
no, that's just the...
Shoot. I cut across your one, shake up.
Sorry. But just like the talky player who's expecting, well, all these goblins have intelligence and charisma, so clearly we can negotiate with them, versus the person who's been talking to people, for the last 8 hours on the phone and just wants to, use sword on man a little. And then you get the tactical genius who wants everything laid out in 5-foot squares so they can minutely bring out their pace, versus the let's say narrative person who wants to jump on tables, go on a chandelier that wasn't there before, and do various very free form things of narrative positioning rather than miniature positioning, and just stuff like that. Like tone is another one. That's something I think tone is probably one where the GM can do the most work during the game. Just making sure that they maintain their tone at the right level. But that's something you really probably want to be setting out at the start. I do think there's something to be said for your idea of the 6 session starter with option to renew. And I think that's possibly an older style of gaming that maybe might be worth thinking about again. The idea of splitting things into modules, not necessarily like modules you buy, but just that you have your campaign is in chunks.
I've started doing.
You're not necessarily going to have the same.
The way I look at it is off ramps. Okay, so you go, here's the full narrative, right? But here are the bits where we could actually end this story. That there's more that we could go to, but here are the off ramps where you can go. This is an ending. Does it save the universe? Doesn't have to. Saves the city, the planet, the star system, the galaxy, the universe, and any of these we can just stop with. And I think that's important because it allows for not only party dynamic but also just life. Sometimes life finds a way to mess up your gaming schedule. So I think it's important to have those, and I've tried to build them into. I've gotten to building the off ramps into the campaign, but I kind of tend to forget to do the party selection at the beginning. So I have the what if this goes wrong, but I don't have the preventative. What steps am I taking to stop it from going wrong? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yep.
I do think the emerging concept of session 0 is possibly it's certainly the tool I would recommend is the best.
No, session 0 sets your expectations for the campaign, right? And that's an agreement, and that's what we're aiming for. But you cannot set expectations for an emergent property like a social dynamic, because people won't be aware of their behavior, their prejudices, their likes, their dislikes, and you don't know what annoys you or what doesn't annoy you about someone till you get to know them. So you can't session 0 a social dynamic. You have to experience it.
Also, you can often hand wave something annoying in session 1, but by session 37, you've had it up to here with it. This person has this particular habit that annoys the hell out of me. But it's okay. I pushed it down in the first couple of sessions, and I'm continuing to push it down, but you come to the point where you can push it down no longer, and the whole thing comes to a head. And often in a kind of explosive manner. You could have the bit where literally you show up for the game, and the person has literally removed the GM from the room to privately roleplay for 2 hours. And then they come back and then immediately go, oh, there's one more thing we have to do, and went back out of the room again, and you explode at that point. Because you've been sitting in a room for 2 hours waiting for the game to start. Because this actually happened to me. I was there for this one, and I was like, okay, that's enough. I can take no more. Sorry, But that's, and you need to, that's good. You need to be aware that just because the first 6 sessions go fine and the first 10 sessions go fine doesn't mean you're out of the woods. Problems can crop up, and you need to have a way of kind of honestly discussing them. Like, I have occasionally had to remove a player from the game because of the complaints of other players. And I had to have quite an awkward conversation about it. And it wasn't fun, and it was a GM that kind of fell on me. I went back into the room, one of the players cracked a joke about it, and I said, hang on a second, you didn't have to have that awkward conversation. So until you go have that conversation, you can't make fun.
And the thing is, the people that tend to be in your game tend to be your friends, or at least people you don't actively hate. So even though 4 of the 5 people may not be getting on with the 5th, you still want a relationship with that person, you know? And it can be very difficult to say, look, literally, it's not you or me, but it is a situation. I've had the opposite, where I've actually left a long-term RPG. I'm sure I've talked about this before, just because it was literally not the RPG for me. That it was set in a time, like a historical time period, and I know nothing about historical time periods, you know? I was like, where are the dwarves and the elves? And like, they didn't have them in Russia during this time period, or ever. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, fair enough. But it was just, it didn't speak to me. Liked all the people. Didn't have the knowledge of the setting. Therefore, I wasn't really getting a huge amount out of it. And after a while, I had to go, well, I'm actually not engaging with this. I like all of these people. I like the GM. It is not, by any stretch of the imagination, a bad game. But it is not for me. And that made perfect sense for me to go to the GM and say, look, I'm going to have to stop playing this because I don't feel this is pitched at Graham. That can be a difficult thing to do without offending somebody, you know? And I don't know if I pulled it off. They still talk to me, absolutely. So presumably I didn't offend them too badly. But I find in situations like that, all you can be is honest, you know?
I have one player who doesn't know anything about history. So occasionally I have to go, yeah, that was World War II. And he's like, which one was that? And I say, Germany and Japan versus the US, Russia, and England, more or less. And he's like, okay. So where did that happen? And I said,
the clue is indeed in the name there.
Yeah. And like doesn't know. Just doesn't know anything about it. It's kind of like sort of vaguely aware. Like really vaguely.
Yeah.
Really vaguely
I gave
aware,
up. I gave up judging people about 20 years ago. You know, I'm just like, sure, that's a piece of information. This person doesn't know history. I'm not going to judge them. Now we build it into those interactions. You know.
Oh, I don't.
You have to build it in.
You have to account for it. You're like, because I was sort of Call of Cthulhu. I kind of going. He was like 1920s, and I'm like, yep. And he's like, is this before the World Wars? And I'm like, between them.
Yeah.
And you just have to account for it. Kind of like, this is this thing. And kind of will uncritically accept some things. And kind of I'm like, you know that's not true. And he's like, oh, right. Okay, cool. That's clearly not true. I am, in fact, a veteran of World War I.
Yeah.
So yeah, just you account for those things.
Yeah, but I said you can do a session 0 where you go, what kind of gaming style would you like? What are your expectations of this game? This is the tone. This is how long it's going to go. You can have all sort of the facts that you're going to aim for. But we did talk about this in Whose Game Is It Anyway, right? The game is not what the GM had in mind to begin with. It never is. And because, you know, circumstances overtake. And if you were just going to lay out a game that was exactly as you envisioned it, you'd write a novel. So there's an emergent property of interaction between all the people that are there. And you can kind of preempt that to a degree, but you can't to a larger degree. You have to actually experience it, you know? And I suppose the off-ramps are one good way of doing it. I think what Owen said there, having a mind of selecting people who you think are going to have similar schedules and similar expectations for expenditure versus reward and a time point of view, you know, that's important then as well. And I still think that there's no point in doing, if you do a 20 session tester, that's just a game. You've just run a game. Like there's no point in doing that. But I think having a degree of sessions, and also I think being able to say, and this sounds terribly exclusionary, because you're like, what about this new person we've never met before? Well, do we know anything about them? No, they're new. We've never met them before. I'm sorry, we can't have them. But I think having an idea to sort of go, what do you know about Shane? Well, I played a game with Shane before. Here are the things I liked about him. Here's the things I didn't like about him. Here's what I found easy. Here's what I found hard. Shane's quite interested in this. He's not interested in that. I think you need to have some sort of intelligence about your players. You can't just go to it cold and hope everything will be okay. Or maybe I just know a lot of terrible people and everyone else just gets together and plays games and everything is fine. I don't know. But this is just my experience, you know?
I do think there's a reason. I do think there's the element of, you know, you can't rely on the same thing always, particularly if you do want to get to know new players. That's part of why I try to adjust my games to allow one or two new people to me in each time. But also just the general thing of conventions. Like that's, there's a lot of people who in the gaming scene who don't think conventions are very important or don't mean a lot to them. And those tend to be the people who have already established groups that they can rely on for everything. Whereas I really feel like, a big part of conventions for me was getting to meet new gamers, the new gamers who are on the block,
Absolutely.
the new gamers who had been around for 20 years and never seen them before. And that's one of the things they're missing.
But I don't eat my soup with a fork, okay? And I also don't try and cut my sandwich with a spoon. Different tools for different things. So convention game is 3 hours long. If you don't like someone, it's only 3 hours, And even then, if you don't like someone, 3 hours can still seem a long time. But different tools are for different jobs. So what I'm talking about is party selection for a long-term campaign, which is the type of game I tend to run. What you're talking about is how do you meet new people? Conventions, perfect. One-offs, short-running campaigns, that sort of thing. That's fine, because the consequence if things don't go well is not as large, I
suppose.
There's a reason as well why a lot of people will recommend you don't discuss politics. Because you might have a game that's going perfectly well, and then you mention politics, and you figure out where people have very different opinions for you about some things, and it's just you're like, oh wow, I didn't want to dig up this.
But you find yourself saying things like, well, some of my best friends are wrong.
Like I don't want to tell you how many of my friends have opinions along the lines of, well, unions are stupid. They're really bad for business. They're really bad for the economy. They're really bad for everything. And I'm kind of going, I see. I didn't know you were a traitor. That's unfortunate. So like you're just better off kind of going, just like I don't want to. There's certain chunks of people's lives you actually don't want to know about. If you could be going along very harmoniously, let's get to know these people better. Okay, so sometimes that works out. Sometimes you're going along perfectly well in your game and go, we should know each other more. Let's introduce some stuff. And I'm like, you want to be careful about that because you might find, this game was good. Then we found out that, X believes that the space is a blanket hung by God, or someone literally believes in angels. And you're like, what, literally? Yeah, there's an angel on all of our shoulders and it advises us about what to do. And I'm like a cartoon? No, a real angel. Right. Okay. And he says, do you not believe in angels? And I'm like, okay, how do I answer this one in a way that doesn't nuke my game from orbit? So yeah, like, you're sometimes better off, if you've got a working dynamic, be very careful about altering it. Like, bring in even one more person. There's also a thing about, I spotted one game where you can have kind of yin and yang energy sometimes in one way, in that some people are very creative and certain people are very structured. And the creative people are great at coming up with ideas, and the structured people are very good at executing. And if you have a mix in the game often runs quite well, because the creative people come up with ideas that might be unworkable, but have a seed of something good in there, and a structured person then channels them into something workable. If you have a game where everyone is creative, the whole thing devolves into a series of randomized plots that are one person is making people are making everything up, and everyone's kind of going, and then we'll do this, and then we'll do this, and we'll do this, and none of it actually hangs together, and the whole thing collapses. And on the other hand, you can have a game where everyone's very structured, and they find it very hard to do things because no one comes up with any ideas. All they can do is kind of execute their existing idea. They find it difficult to pivot. So you need to have a mixture of kind of energies in the group in terms of what. Because everyone takes up roles in a group based on group dynamics, but you need some people to come up with ideas, and you need some people often to critique and shape those ideas. And if you have, because I was in a group where there were like 7 people who were very creative, and nobody was very structured apart from me. So I ended up being the disapproving father, kind of going, no, that won't work. No, that won't work. No, that won't work. Stop that. Put that down. Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't do that. We'll do this. We'll take that element there, put that together, that together, that together. And you're a little bit of a tin pot dictator. But you need to be, because you're the only person putting structure on it. And you don't necessarily want to be that, but you're that. And I was in a game where no one had ideas, and I'm like, they're all sitting around kind of going, what do we do? And I'm kind of like, guys, you could do...
So I guess the idea there is there are some things as a GM you can preempt when you're sitting down, because you're going to be the creative force initially. If you're bringing people in later on, then you're going to be consulting with the already created book group. But if there isn't an already created group, if you're starting from scratch, you sit down and go, okay, well, I'm going to get these 4 or 5 people and see if their schedules line up. What do I think about? Are they going to have similar availability? Are they going to have similar respect for the time and the input versus output? How do I get a mix of people? How do I get someone who's more creative, someone who's more structured, people who are different but still enjoy the same kind of game, because they can't be too different. Otherwise, why don't we talk to everyone? Why don't we kill everyone? So you've got to keep all that in mind. And having done all of that, also hopefully selecting people that you enjoy spending time with rather than people who are just optimized for these particular character traits, you then go, okay, here I've got my nascent group. And then maybe what you do is you try a pre-published or a short intro adventure. And that has to be your first off-ramp, I think, where you need to say to people, look, let's give it a go. And again, set the expectation that, or maybe you don't. Maybe you just do the old Irish thing where you run the first 6 sessions and they go, oh, my schedule has come unstuck. I'm getting a couch delivered every Wednesday. Because the other way some people are like, actually, rather than being honest with people, it's easier just to lie and then kind of drift away. But you've got some sort of off-ramp, whatever your personal communication style is, that if that 6 lead-in doesn't necessarily work, and then maybe you build in some off-ramps along the way as well. And maybe also, if, huge problems happen between off-ramps, you have some idea as to how you're going to have that conversation with someone. Well, we, the group, don't feel your contribution is necessarily working, valid, required, beneficial, which is an awful conversation to have if you're the GM. But also I think you need to be aware as a player to be able to go, well, I don't feel that this is working for me, and I'm going to off-ramp here as well. We often, when I pitch this as an idea for a session, I know Owen was like, this is going to come down to make sure you communicate with your players. And I'm like, yeah, but this is one of those things I think you can prepare a little bit for, but it's also kind of a dynamic situation.
Yeah.
Also, if you're getting fired by your group, I think just the GM doing it is better than having a panel firing you.
We've decided to go a different way, yeah.
I like everyone on one side of the table just kind of going, yeah, just pick up your stuff and hit the bricks, I think it's probably better for the G, because you'd be like, okay, let's do the panel firing. Let's invite them to the start of the next session, fire them there, and then get them to walk out. And I was like, I think it's probably better 1-to-1 with the GM just as a quiet, we're going to go a different way. We're like, you might even say, oh, we're calling the game.
No, that's the worst one. Whatever
it's
about
over.
No.
It is, but that is the Irish solution to that one.
The problem with that is
the Irish solution.
Even from a purely practical point of view, right? They will find out that you're still playing the game, and it will be a million times worse. Forget the actual moral imperative and honesty and all that sort of thing. Let's just be wholeheartedly pragmatic. It won't work. You will feel slightly better at the time, and then everyone will feel much worse later.
Before we wrap up, do we want to maybe just talk about the player perspective of this? And are there things you could do as a player coming into a group to help the process along?
I don't know how
self-aware probably be.
Engage all your most annoying habits immediately.
I don't know how self-aware people are, though. And I'm talking about me, not just people in general. So if someone sat down and went, well, how are you generally to play with? People will go, I'm a delight. Of course I am. But I don't know. What do you think you could do practically?
Get all your annoying habits right out there at the front. That's about it. That's all you could do. It's not a good strategy, but that's what, if you want to be super honest, you'd be like, okay, 3 things people complain the most about me are as follows. Like, it's like answering the question, what's your biggest weakness in an interview? Are you going to give the genuine answer? Frankly, I'm going to be smarter than almost everyone here and really have a genuine, kind of a vague, good-natured contempt for everyone I work with. It doesn't come out much, but occasionally you'll see it. And I'm just going to put it out there. It's there. It's there and it's genuine. It's deeply felt. And also
I don't know. I think I'd just say kryptonite. But that's just me. Yeah, that's how you catch Superman in interviews. Yeah. What's your biggest weakness? Kryptonite.
I guess asking people to be self-aware of their playstyle and where there may be friction may be a bit much to ask, but at the very least you should try being as honest as you can and just say, well, if you see a group and you see, there's a couple people there I don't think I get on it, maybe have a just discussion with GM, like, does he think he's going to be able to control? Do they think they're going to be able to control the dynamic, or is the energy? Does your insight to the energies misaligning?
Yeah, okay. I think as a player, it's incumbent upon you, if you know anyone about the people. And this is what I was saying earlier on. Rather than just saying, does anyone have anything bad to say about Owen? What do you know about Owen, right? What are the good things? What are the bad things? It's not enough that Owen is an unknown quantity. We need to know a little bit something about him to see how we might fit in. I think when you're putting together a party, initially, it does behoove you as a player to say, I have concerns about this person's inclusion for these reasons. Not for gossiping, but for this is the difficulties I could see coming up. So then at least you've got the information. In a similar way, I think everyone has to be willing to be honest to actually give that information if it comes up in play. Because again, we have the Irish problem. What's wrong? Nothing. You've been complaining about this person behind my back for 6 weeks now. What's wrong? Nothing. That doesn't work. There has to be some actual honest feedback. Okay,
so Graham, do you think you have an answer or set of vague pleasantries?
No, vague pleasantries doesn't work because intention and execution are the 2 problems here, right? Intention is we want everyone to have fun, we want everyone to get on, okay? But wanting doesn't make it so. And intention is not good enough. So what you in fact need is execution. You need a strategy. And the strategy there is what I've been trying to kind of unpick and tease for this particular game. Because I think we'd all agree that it is a noble endeavor to have a party that works together, right? Or a player we want people, man born of woman hath but a short time to live, okay? And we want to try and maximize the time that we have to have fun. Life's hard. And I have indeed purchased a helmet. Thank you, Blood Bowl. But I also don't want it all to be, helmets and Blood Bowl all the time. I want to have fun. And to do that, you need to think about, well, what parameters here are going to make us have fun? What parameters here are not going to make us have fun? So vague is not enough in this instance. I think we hit upon a couple of things that actually give you a structure as to how you can preempt this from happening and deal with this when it does happen. So yes, I do have an answer, but it's not a vague one. All right. Thank you for listening to me complain for 45 minutes with Owen and Shane trying to inject some sort of sanity and actual structure on the whole thing. I think, do you have anything else to say?
Honesty. It might not be the most fun policy, probably still pretty good. And, tone. And, yeah, I guess it is a very different dynamic if you have a short game versus a long game. Like, in a shorter game, you have chances to be more experimental, more open. And I've met some great people by having open tables that just had, no one was committed for, 57 sessions of nonsense. And we were able to try and we were able to meet people and we were able to feel people out. And, you can't just have big, ancient 2-year-long, epic games. But when you do,
that's exactly it. This is the kind of game I tend to run. It may not be the type of game everyone else tends to run, but this is a problem I have encountered through running that type of game. Thus, it's something I want to explore. It's not universal to every game, obviously. Owen, any final thoughts?
To quote Richard Morgan, face the facts, then act on them. It's the only mantra I know, the only doctrine I have to offer you, and it's hard for me to think because I swear humans seem hardwired to do anything but. Face the facts. Don't pray. Don't wish. Don't buy into centuries-old dogma and dead rhetoric. Don't give in to your conditioning or your visions or your sense of whatever. Face the facts, then act.
That's good advice, I have to say. As, that's hard to argue with. All right, well, on that particular note, thank you very much.
Also super difficult.
Yeah, also. Always there's more. Go on.
Also it's super difficult. I'm going to honestly look at this problem. Oh, no, you're not. Oh, no, you're not.
I think at least if you can aspire toward that, you might achieve some of it. Yeah. You know? A man's reach must exceed his grasp, or what is a heaven for? And look, thank you very much for sticking with us for the last 48 minutes or so, or however long this is edited down to be, probably by Shane. I hope you found this useful and insightful in some way, shape, or form. If this all seems rather self-evident to you, then thank you for sticking with us anyway. And on that note, this party's over.
Thank you for listening to The Adventuring Party. If you'd like to leave us a voicemail, you can head on over to SpeakPipe and drop us a line. Or you can join us on our Discord server, where we keep the party going after hours. Otherwise, you can find us on Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or Twitter. Or you can email the hosts at party@theadventuringparty.net. The Adventuring Party is released under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share-alike version 3 license. But you probably knew that already. We hope you enjoyed the episode, and look forward to seeing you back here next week. Goodbye.